Hello, and welcome to Anana's Creation. Today, we begin a new journey, a story of echoes, of power hidden in plain sight, and of a fire that never truly dies. This is the story of the Amber Spark. The city of Portland, Oregon, exists in a state of permanent twilight, or so it felt to Clara Mason. It was a city of bridges, roses, and a persistent, gentle drizzle that washed the streets clean and made the neon signs bleed into the pavement. Clara was a woman forged in this environment, practical, creative, and with a core of resilience she rarely had to test. She was a jeweler, an artist who worked with metal and stone. Her shop, the Gilded Bow, was a small, warm space tucked away on a side street, smelling of polishing compound and hot coffee. Clara believed beauty was a necessity, not a luxury. Her hands, calloused and often stained, brought forth intricate designs, silver pendants that looked like frozen branches, rings that held stones like captured drops of rain. This was her love, her art. But there was another side to Clara, a side she kept folded away. She had a temper that, when roused, was less like a flame and more like a flash flood, sudden, powerful, and overwhelming. She was fiercely protective of the few people she let close, her younger brother, Ben, and her elderly shop neighbor, Mr. Henderson. This was her war. The magic, however, that was new. It had started subtly, a flicker in her peripheral vision, a sudden, intense understanding of a customer's feelings, as if she could see the color of their emotions. Lately, it had been the metal. She'd be working, lost in the focus of soldering a delicate joint, and the copper or silver would seem to listen to her. It would bend more easily, settle more perfectly than her skill alone should allow. She dismissed it as fatigue, as imagination, until the night of the amber. It was a Tuesday, wet and cold. The shop was quiet. Clara was working on a custom piece, a necklace for a client who had lost her husband. The client wanted something that felt like sunshine. Clara had sourced a unique piece of Baltic amber, a teardrop of fossilized resin that seemed to hold a prehistoric sun within it. As she held the stone, polishing it, a strange warmth bloomed in her palm. It wasn't the heat of friction. It was a deep, resonant heat, like a sleeping animal. She half expected to feel a pulse. The scent of pine and ancient forests filled her workspace, overpowering the smell of the coffee. She closed her eyes, just for a second. A vision hit her, sharp and sudden. Not a memory, but a feeling. A vast, snowy field. The cry of a hawk overhead. The weight of a heavy cloak on her shoulders and the sound of a horn, not in the distance, but in her own blood. She felt a profound, aching longing and a simultaneous surge of power. Her eyes snapped open. The amber in her hand was now so hot it was almost painful. She dropped it on her workbench, where it sat, glowing with an internal, golden light that slowly, perceptibly, faded back to its normal state. Clara's heart was hammering. She touched her own neck, a nervous habit. Her skin felt strangely sensitized, as if she should be wearing a heavy necklace, something powerful and heavy, right there at the hollow of her throat. What in the world? She whispered, her voice shaky. The shop bell chimed, startling her. It was Ben, her brother, shaking rainwater from his jacket. "Hey, Clara," he said, flashing a smile that was usually bright enough to cut through the Oregon gloom. But tonight it faltered. His eyes were shadowed, and there was a tension in his shoulders. "Ben, what's wrong?" Clara moved from behind her bench, the strange incident with the amber momentarily forgotten. "It's nothing. Just guys from the old neighborhood," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Ben was a good kid, a college student trying to stay on the right path, but their old neighborhood had long shadows. "Who?" Clara's voice was low, the warmth of the artist replaced by the sharp edge of the protector. "Just Tony and Rick. They think I owe them. You know, for street loyalty or something stupid. They're pressing me for money. I told them I don't have it." Clara's jaw tightened. Rick and Tony. Two local parasites who mistook bullying for strength. "Where are they?" "Clara, no. Don't. It's fine. I'll handle it." "Where are they, Ben?" Her voice was flat. He sighed, knowing that look. "They're at the diner. But they said they'd be waiting after my class tomorrow." "Clara, please, don't make it worse." "Go home, Ben. Lock the door. I'm just going to clean up here." He looked at her, suspicious and worried, but he also looked relieved. He nodded, gave her a quick, tight hug, and left, pulling his hood up against the rain. The moment the door clicked shut, Clara turned to her workbench. The amber was cool again, just a simple stone. But something in Clara had changed. The strange vision, the snow, the hawk, the power, was still vibrating at the edge of her mind. She didn't feel like an artist. She didn't feel like a shop owner. She felt ancient. She put the amber stone on a simple leather cord and tied it around her neck. It settled against her skin, feeling immediately, impossibly, like it had always been there. It was warm. She turned off the lights in her shop, pulled on her heaviest coat, a coat that suddenly felt less like protection and more like armor, and stepped out into the rain-slicked street. She wasn't going to the diner. She wasn't going to start a fight. She was just going to have a conversation. But as she walked, the drizzle seemed to part for her. The flickering streetlights seemed to burn brighter as she passed beneath them. And in the darkened glass of a shop window, the reflection that looked back at her was just Clara Mason, a jeweler from Portland. But her eyes were glowing with a faint, golden light, like two captured suns. The war had begun. Clara walked, but the word felt insufficient. She moved. The rain, which had been a persistent, cold annoyance all day, now seemed to hold its breath around her. It still fell, but not a single drop seemed to touch her skin. She moved through the slick, reflective streets of Portland like a ship's prow cutting through water, creating a small, silent wake. The amber against her skin was no longer just warm. It was a humming, living thing. A low, resonant vibration that she felt in her bones, not her ears. It was a song, and it was a threat. She knew these streets. She and Ben had grown up here, in the concrete canyons between the rose gardens and the river. She knew the alleys that smelled of stale beer and damp cardboard, and she knew the corners where shadows held more than just darkness. She found them exactly where she knew they would be, under the faulty, sputtering neon sign of a closed laundromat. Rick and Tony were leaning against a brick wall, hoods pulled up, sharing a cigarette in the drizzle. They were exactly as she remembered them, small men trying to cast large shadows. They saw her coming. Their posture changed. They straightened up, surprise warring with arrogance. "Well, look at this," Rick sneered. He was the taller of the two, with a thin, nervous face. "It's the art lady, Ben's sister. You lost, sweetheart? Your little shop is back that way." Tony, stockier and slower, just watched her, his eyes assessing. He flicked the cigarette into a puddle, where it hissed and died. "Ben send you? He finally got smart and brought us our money." Clara stopped about 10 feet from them. The sputtering neon sign cast a sickly red light on their faces. The amber on her chest pulsed with heat, a counterpoint to the cold air. "You will leave him alone," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. It didn't carry the usual tremor of fear or anger they were used to. It was a statement of fact. Rick laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Or what? You gonna make us a pretty necklace? We're not scared of you." He took a step toward her, hands shoved in his pockets, adopting a faux-friendly demeanor. "Look, Clara, Ben's a nice kid. We just need to teach him about respect. A small fee. That's all. Maybe you can pay it for him." He was too close now. He reached out, his hand aiming to grab her arm, to intimidate, to control. The moment his fingers brushed the sleeve of her coat, it happened. It wasn't a flash of light. It wasn't a push of force. It was vision. The world tilted, and Clara didn't just see Rick. She saw him. She saw him as a 10-year-old boy, crying because his father had pawned his bike. She saw him, just last week, sitting in his car, unable to make rent, the bitter taste of cheap whiskey and failure in his mouth. She saw the core of him, and it wasn't anger or malice. It was just a hollow, echoing fear. The connection was so strong, so sudden, that she spoke the knowledge aloud. "You're terrified." Rick froze. His hand was still on her arm, but his confident smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. What did you just say?" "You're afraid," Clara repeated, and this time, her voice was different. It was deeper, with a strange, metallic resonance, as if she were speaking through a bronze horn. "You're afraid you'll end up just like him. Drunk, forgotten, worthless." Rick stumbled back, pulling his hand away as if her coat had burned him. "How? How did you?" Tony, seeing his friend's sudden panic, reacted with the only emotion he knew: aggression. He moved, pulling a small, cheap pocket knife from his jacket. The blade snapped open with a pathetic click. "Back off, you witch," he shouted, his voice cracking. He held the knife in front of him, but his hand was shaking. Clara didn't even look at the knife. Her gaze was locked on Tony. The amber was now scalding hot, a furnace against her skin. The vision of the snowy field flashed in her mind, the hawk's cry, the weight of a shield on her arm. This was not a negotiation. This was a battlefield. "Put it away," she commanded. "I'll cut you," Tony threatened, but he took a step back. "No, you won't," Clara said. The strange, layered voice was back, and it filled the small, wet space between them. "The steel in your hand is weak. It remembers the fire that forged it, and it wants to return. It fears me." As she spoke, the sputtering neon sign above their heads did not just flicker. It popped. A shower of red sparks rained down, dying in the wet air. The sign went dark, plunging the corner into near total blackness. The only light was a faint, golden aura that seemed to be coming from Clara herself, from the amber, from her eyes. Tony looked at the dead sign, then at his knife, then at the glowing woman in front of him. This was not normal. This was not a simple shakedown. This was something else. "The metal is afraid," Clara continued, her voice a low, terrifying hum. "The blood in your veins is afraid. You will leave my brother alone. You will not go near his school. You will not go near my shop. You will not speak his name. If you do, I will know. And you will remember what it feels like to be truly afraid." She took one step forward. That was all it took. Tony yelped. He dropped the knife, the clatter of it on the pavement echoing loudly in the sudden silence. He turned and ran, slipping on the wet sidewalk, scrambling to get away. Rick was already gone, a distant shadow disappearing around the corner. Clara was alone. The silence of the alley rushed back in, filled only by the sound of the rain and her own ragged breathing. The golden light faded from her eyes. The oppressive heat from the amber subsided, leaving it just a warm stone against her skin. She looked down. The knife lay on the pavement. She bent and picked it up. The metal was cold and wet. She leaned against the cold, damp brick wall, her legs suddenly weak. The power that had filled her, that ancient, terrifying certainty, was gone, leaving her feeling hollowed out, as if she had just woken from a violent dream. But it wasn't a dream. She looked at the small knife in her hand, then closed her fist around it. She hadn't just scared them. She had commanded them. She had seen their secrets. "What is happening to me?" she whispered to the empty, rainy street. The amber, warm against her palm, offered no answer. But in her mind, she heard the echo of a hawk's cry, far, far away. The war was over. The magic had just begun. The walk back to the Gilded Bough was a disorienting blur. The world had snapped back into its normal focus. The rain was cold and wet, no longer parting for her. The neon signs were just lights, bleeding into the puddles. The sounds of the city, a distant siren, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, rushed back into her ears. Clara felt utterly hollowed out, as if the power she had channeled had taken a piece of her with it when it left. Her legs were shaking, and a cold sweat, entirely separate from the rain, clung to her back. She fumbled with the keys to her shop, her usually steady jeweler's hands trembling so badly it took 3 tries to get the lock to turn. She stumbled inside, locking the door firmly behind her, leaning against the solid wood in the darkness. She was safe. Ben was safe. But she was not the same person who had left the shop 30 minutes ago. She flicked on her small workbench lamp. The single pool of light was comforting, illuminating the familiar, creative chaos. Tiny files, coils of silver wire, a scattering of half-finished earrings. She sank onto her stool, the one worn smooth by years of work. She touched the amber at her throat. It was just warm now, a pleasant, smooth stone. She unfastened the leather cord and laid the amber on her workbench, right in the center of the light. It looked exactly as it had before. A beautiful, flawed piece of fossilized resin with a few tiny, prehistoric inclusions. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't humming. It was just a rock. "Did I imagine it?" she whispered, the sound deadened by the shelves of supplies. But she knew she hadn't. The memory of Rick's terror, the sight of his deepest fear, was burned into her mind. The sound of her own voice, layered and ancient, echoed in her ears. And the knife. She had left the knife in the alley. The thought sent a jolt of panic through her, but it was quickly replaced by a cold wave of detachment. It was just a piece of metal. It couldn't be traced to her. A soft, polite tapping on the shop's glass door made her jump, a a startled cry escaping her. "Clara? My dear girl, are you all right in there?" She relaxed, her heart still pounding. It was Arthur Henderson. Mr. Henderson. His antique bookshop, the dusty shelf, was right next door. He was a widower in his late 70s, with kind eyes and a scholarly stoop, and he was the closest thing she had to a father figure in the city. She crossed the dark shop and opened the door. "Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I was just working late." Arthur stood under the small awning, holding a steaming mug. He was in his customary cardigan and slippers. "I saw your light on. Then I heard you come in. You looked like you'd seen a ghost, Clara. And it's nearly midnight." He peered past her into the shop. "I made chamomile. I suspected it might be a chamomile-worthy night." She couldn't help a small, watery smile. "That sounds perfect. Thank you." She stepped back, and he shuffled inside, bringing with him the comforting scent of old paper and tea. He handed her the mug. The warmth was a shock to her cold hands. "You're not working," he observed gently, his eyes landing on her stool, then on the piece of amber sitting alone under the lamp. "You're staring." Clara followed his gaze. "It's just a new piece. I was figuring out the setting." Arthur moved closer to the workbench, his movements slow and careful. He looked at the amber, but he didn't touch it. "Ah, Baltic. A lovely specimen. So much history in these. The Vikings used them as currency. The Romans prized them above all else." He paused, looking at her over the top of his glasses. "The Norse, they had a different name for it. They called it Freya's tears. They believed the goddess of love and war wept tears of amber when her husband was away." Clara's hand, holding the mug, stilled. The name, Freya. It was the second time in 2 days she'd encountered it, first in the back of her mind, now from Arthur. "Freya's tears," she repeated, her voice thin. "Love and war. Seems contradictory." Arthur chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "Does it? I've always found them to be two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the potential for the other. To love something, truly love it, your art, your shop, your brother, doesn't that mean you'd fight for it? Doesn't that make you a warrior?" His words hit her like a physical blow. "Your brother." He couldn't know. It was just a coincidence. She stared at him, trying to see if he was fishing, if he had seen something. But his eyes were just kind, perhaps a little sad. "I suppose so," she said, taking a careful sip of the tea. It was hot and sweet. "They also believed," Arthur continued, his voice softer, "that amber was a stone of protection, that it held the sun's fire and the earth's wisdom, that it could shield the wearer from harm and reveal true natures." He finally looked away from the stone and met her gaze. "It's a piece that carries a lot of weight, Clara. Be careful how you set it. A stone like that, it chooses its setting, and it chooses its wearer." He patted her arm, his hand warm and dry. "Now, I'll leave you to your work, or you're staring. Drink the tea, and get some rest. The world always looks clearer in the morning." "Thank you, Arthur. Good night." He let himself out, the small bell on the door chiming softly, and she locked it again behind him. Clara stood in the silence, the tea mug warming her hands. Love and war. Protection. Revealing true natures. She looked at the amber. Arthur's words had given her a new, terrifying context. He hadn't seen the glow. He hadn't heard her voice. He had simply looked at a stone and told her its story. A story that was now, somehow, her story. She finished the tea, the chamomile doing little to calm the vibrating energy under her skin. She walked back to her bench. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. She set the mug down and picked up a simple, thick piece of raw silver wire. She held it in her left hand. Then, with her right, she picked up the amber. The moment the stone touched her palm, the silver wire in her other hand changed. It wasn't her imagination. The metal, cold and stiff a second ago, suddenly felt malleable, soft, almost alive. She closed her eyes, focusing on the silver. She thought of a leaf, the curve of its edge, the line of its central vein. When she opened her eyes, the silver wire was no longer a straight rod. It was bent, perfectly, into the outline of an oak leaf. She hadn't used pliers. She hadn't used a hammer. She had just wished it. Clara sat back hard on her stool, the silver leaf clattering to the bench next to the amber tear. The magic, it seemed, wasn't just for war. It was for creation, too. And she had no idea what to do with it. Clara sat in the silent, lamplit shop for a long time, staring at the two objects on her workbench, the ancient, golden amber and the brand new, impossible silver leaf. Her mind was a jeweler's lens, examining the leaf. The edges were perfect. The central vein was precise. No tool she owned could have made this so quickly, so organically. It looked like it had grown from the wire. She was an artist, a creator. Her first instinct, overriding the fear, was a jolt of pure, unfiltered joy. What could she make? She picked up another piece of silver, a thicker gauge. She closed her eyes, holding the amber in her other hand. This time, she didn't think of a leaf. She thought of a spiral, a tight, perfect, repeating spiral, like a galaxy or a fingerprint. She focused on the feel of the metal, its cold potential, and pushed her will into it. It resisted. For a second, nothing happened. It was just a cold, stubborn wire. But then, the amber at her neck pulsed with heat, a sudden, sharp sting. The silver in her hand instantly became as soft as warm wax. It coiled in her grasp, twisting on itself, wrapping into the exact spiral she had imagined. It was done in a second. She opened her eyes, gasping. The silver was now cool to the touch, perfectly solid, and she was exhausted. It was the same hollowed-out, bone-deep weariness she'd felt in the alley, only muted. The magic had a price. It seemed that creation and conflict drew from the same deep, dark well inside her. Love and war. Arthur's words echoed in her mind. One to destroy, one to build. But both cost her. She looked at the clock. It was almost 2 a.m. She carefully placed the amber, the leaf, and the spiral into her smallest, strongest safe, locked it, and went home, her mind too full and her body too tired for dreams. Morning came with the familiar gray light of a Portland dawn. Clara opened her shop on autopilot, the scent of coffee and polishing compound a thin veneer over the buzzing energy that now lived under her skin. She wore the amber under her shirt, a hidden, heavy secret. Around 10 o'clock, the shop bell chimed. It was Ben, Clara. His smile was wide and genuine, the shadows from the night before completely gone. I don't know what you did, but it worked. Clara's heart stuttered. What do you mean? Rick and Tony. I went to class this morning, bracing for it. They weren't there. I thought maybe they were just late. But my buddy, Sam, who works at the diner, he said they came in last night, paid their bill, which they never do, and told the manager they were leaving town. Said something about a family emergency in Idaho. Ben laughed, a sound of pure relief. Idaho. Can you believe it? You must have really scared them. What did you tell them? That you'd call the cops? Clara forced a smile. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Something like that. I just reasoned with them. Told them they were messing with the wrong people. It was the truth, but it was also a profound deception. Ben's relief was so total that he didn't see the shadow in her eyes. He hugged her tightly, lifting her off the ground. You're the best, Clara. My hero. Always, Ben. Always, she whispered, holding him tightly. The love for him was a physical ache in her chest. And for the first time, she felt the cost of protecting him, not just the magic, but the secret. The lie was a new wall between them. He left to meet his study group, promising to bring back pizza for lunch, and the shop was quiet again. Clara leaned her head against the cool wood of the doorframe. The joy of Ben's safety was poisoned by the isolation of her secret. She was alone with this power, this burden. She closed her eyes, and the amber, as if sensing her emotional turmoil, flared. The vision was not a memory. It was immediate. It was now. She was no longer in her shop. She was high above the city, on the flat roof of a sleek, glass and steel skyscraper she didn't recognize. The wind was sharp, carrying the distant smell of the river. A man was standing near the ledge, his back to her. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit that seemed out of place in the wind-whipped air. He wasn't American. He had the sharp, aristocratic features of old Europe. As she watched, a sound cut through the wind, the sharp, ringing cry of a bird of prey. The man raised his arm, which was wrapped in a thick leather bracer, a peregrine falcon, its feathers sleek and dark, dove from the sky, its talons extending. It landed on his arm with a precision that spoke of endless training. The man turned, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale and piercing. He wasn't looking at the city. He was looking directly at her, at Clara. as if she were standing right in front of him and not in a vision miles away. He knew she was there. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile of assessment, of recognition. It was the smile of a hunter who has just spotted a rare, new predator in his territory. Clara tried to break the vision, to pull back, but she was frozen. The falcon on his arm ruffled its feathers, its own dark eyes fixed on her, a perfect, beautiful killing machine. Then the man spoke. She didn't hear it with her ears, but directly in her mind, a voice that was calm, cultured, and laced with cold authority. So he said, "Another one awakens. The falconer has found his quarry." The vision shattered. Clara gasped, stumbling back, knocking a tray of silver findings off her workbench. They scattered across the floor with a metallic spray of sound. She was back in her shop, the smell of coffee, the sound of the street, but her heart was pounding with a new, far greater terror than she had felt in the alley. Rick and Tony were bullies. This man, this falconer, he was something else entirely. He was like her, and he had been waiting. Clara stood frozen, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The metallic tinkle of the silver findings rolling into the corners of her shop was the only sound. The vision was gone, but the man's voice, "The falconer has found his quarry," was imprinted on her mind, a cold, clear echo. This was not a street-level threat. This was not a problem she could solve with a burst of intimidating light or a perfectly sculpted piece of silver. This was organized. This was other. He had seen her. He knew. Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to overwhelm her. Her first animal instinct was to rip the amber from her neck, to throw it into the Willamette River, to run. But a deeper, colder knowledge stopped her. It was too late. The amber hadn't given her this power. It had simply unlocked it. It was part of her. And the falconer had seen her, not the stone. Quarry, she whispered, the word tasting sour. Something to be hunted. Her hands were shaking again, but this time with fear, not exertion. She knelt, mechanically sweeping the tiny silver rings and clasps into a dustpan. She needed information. She couldn't be the only one. The man in the suit, he'd said another one awakens, implying there were more. Her gaze fell on the wall she shared with the shop next door. The dusty shelf. Arthur Henderson. He had known the name. Freya's tears. He had spoken of love and war, of revealing true natures. Had it been a random, scholarly coincidence? Or had it been a test? She dumped the findings onto her bench, locked her shop door from the inside, though she knew it would do no good against a man who could see her across the city, and grabbed her coat. She didn't bother with the "back in 5 minutes" sign. She slipped out her front door and into the connecting alcove that led to Arthur's. The small bell above his door chimed, a sound like tiny, brittle bones. The dusty shelf was the complete opposite of her shop. Where hers was bright, modern, and smelled of metal and heat, Arthur's was a labyrinth. It smelled of paper, leather, dust, and something sweet, like old pipe tobacco. Towers of books rose from the floor, creating narrow, winding paths. The only light came from green-shaded lamps, casting pools of warm yellow in the gloom. "Arthur," she called out, her voice sounding small. In the back. "Mind the history of aqueducts, my dear, it's leaning." She navigated the maze, finding him near a tall, rolling ladder. He was carefully dabbing glue onto the spine of a massive, leather-bound book. He looked up as she approached, his kind eyes immediately registering her panic. "Clara," he said, his voice instantly losing its scholarly detachment. He put the brush down. "My word, child. You look as if you've seen the impossible." I might have," she stammered. "I need to ask you about the amber." Arthur's face did not register surprise. He simply nodded, as if expecting this. "I thought you might." The Freya's tears. "You knew," she breathed. "It wasn't a question. You knew it wasn't just a story." "Stories are never just stories, Clara," he said softly. "They are the only way we have of passing along truths that are too large for facts. What did you see?" "It wasn't just the amber. It's me. I can do things. When I'm angry, I can command. When I'm creating the metal, it listens." Arthur nodded, his expression somber. "There is power in the blood. Old power. The amber is a key, an amplifier. It gravitates toward those who have the dormant spark. It calls to them, and they to it. You bought that stone, but in reality, it bought you." "But who am I?" she pleaded, the isolation and fear of the last 48 hours pouring out. "What am I?" Arthur looked at her for a long, quiet moment. You are an echo, Clara. One of many. The world is older than we think. The gods and goddesses, the great powers, they were not myths. They were just people, so infused with a single, raw concept that they became its avatar. Love, war, wisdom, the hunt. And when they faded, he continued, their power did not vanish. It scattered. It shattered into thousands of pieces and fell dormant in the human bloodline, waiting. Waiting for what? For the world to need them again. For an anchor. And it seems, my dear, he looked around at his dusty, quiet shop. The world is very much in need. A cold realization settled on her. You said one of many. The man I saw, he had a falcon. He called me quarry. He called himself the falconer. Arthur's face, usually so kind, hardened. The gentle scholar vanished, replaced by someone sharp and wary. A falcon, he said, his voice low. Then he is an echo of Horus. Or perhaps Odin in his hunter aspect. They are not the same line as you, Clara. They are not friendly. What is my line? She demanded. The name was Freya, was it not? Arthur said. The lady, the seer, the war leader, the lover. She who wept amber. She who flew in a cloak of falcon feathers, but was not a falconer. He turned from her and walked to a cluttered desk. He pulled out a small, worn, maroon-colored book. It had no title on the cover, only a single, embossed symbol, a hawk's feather crossed with a spray of amber. This is not a storybook, he said, pressing it into her hands. The leather was old but supple. It is a field guide, of a sort. It is not for sale. Arthur, are you one? An echo. A sad smile touched his lips. I am just a man who reads. A watcher. A friend to the library. Some of us serve the echoes, even if we are not ones ourselves. I am a keeper of the stories. You, Clara, are about to become one. He gently guided her toward the front of the shop. Go home. Lock your door. Read the book. Do not trust the man with the falcon. And Clara, he paused, his hand on the door, his eyes deadly serious. Do not wear the amber where it can be seen. He is not the only hunter. And some hunt for love. Some hunt for war. But all of them hunt for power. Clara left the dusty shelf in a daze, the small, maroon book feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. The bell on Arthur's door chimed her exit, the sound now seeming like a tiny warning. The walk back to her own shop was the longest 10 steps of her life. The world was suddenly, terribly, sharp. Every person who walked past her on the sidewalk was a potential something. Was the man reading his phone an echo? Was the woman jogging in the rain a hunter? The city was no longer a collection of strangers. It was a forest full of hidden predators and unknown prey. She fumbled with her keys again, but this time she didn't go into the shop. She went to the side door, the one that led to the small, Spartan apartment she kept above the gilded bow. It was her true sanctuary. She locked the 3 deadbolts, drew the heavy curtains, and finally, exhaled. The room was dark, lit only by the gray-green light filtering in from the street. She sat on her simple bed, the book in her lap. For a moment, she just stared at it. The cover, embossed with the feather and amber, seemed to warm under her gaze. She was an artist. She understood materials. This leather was old, but impossibly supple. It felt less like a book and more like an organism. She opened it. The pages were not modern bleached paper. They were thick, like vellum, and the text, it wasn't printed. It looked like it had been written by hand, in a precise, flowing script, but the ink was a strange, brownish red, almost the color of dried blood. It was in English, but the language was archaic, poetic, and dense. It was, as Arthur had said, a field guide. There was no table of contents. The book seemed to open to the page she needed. The first heading she saw was the shattering and the spark. She read, her heart pounding. The text described an ancient time when the primal roamed, beings who were so full of one concept, love, the hunt, wisdom, the forge, that they burned the world with their presence. It spoke of their fading, not as a death, but as a release. Their power could not be destroyed, she read aloud, her voice a dry whisper. It shattered. It fell into the bloodlines of the world, like seeds on fallow ground, waiting for the right soil, waiting for the echo. She turned the page. The lines of inheritance. The book described different families of power. The Sky Lords, who commanded, saw, and hunted from a distance. The Earth Shapers, who built, forged, and endured. And her, the Hearthbinders. The Hearthbinder, the book read, is the line of connection. Their power is drawn from the bonds they forge. It is the fire of the forge, the heat of the heart, the ferocity of the shield wall. Theirs is the power of Seidr, the weaving of what is. And theirs is the Brinja, the battle skin of will. Clara dropped the book.
Seidr.
The silver leaf, the spiral, weaving the threads of what is. Brinja, the alley, the battle skin that had terrified Rick and Tony. It was all there. It had names. She picked the book up again, her hands shaking. There was another section, anchors and beacons. An echo awakens not by chance, but by necessity. A hearthbinder is ignited by their anchor. The thing they love, the thing they would die for, the thing they would kill for. This love, this anchor, is the source of their deepest power. She thought of Ben, his smile, his absolute relief that morning. My hero.
Yes.
That was it. She read the next line, and all the blood drained from her face. But the anchor is also a beacon. It is a fire in the darkness, a light that all others can see. What you love most is your greatest strength and your most indefensible weakness. A hunter, a skylord, a falconer, he will not strike at the fortress. He will strike at the fire that powers it. The vision from the skyscraper flashed in her mind. The man with the piercing, winter blue eyes. The falconer has found his quarry. He hadn't been looking for her. He had been looking for what had made her awaken. A new, specific, and infinitely more terrible fear gripped her. This wasn't about her. It was about Ben. She stood up, pacing the small apartment. She had to protect him.
But how?
How did she fight a man who could see across the city, who commanded falcons, who was an echo just like her but clearly more experienced, more predatory? She looked at the book. It had given her the problem. It must have the answer. She scanned the pages frantically. She found a chapter near the end. The weaving, sight and shielding. The Seidr worker, it said, does not just shape metal. She shapes notice. She can learn to see her threads, the strands that bind her to her anchors. And once seen, a thread can be hidden, muted, shielded from those who hunt by sight. A new resolve settled over her, extinguishing the panic. It was the same feeling she'd had in the alley. The cold, clear certainty of the warrior. She didn't know how, but she was going to learn. She was going to learn to weave. She was going to take her brother's name, his thread, and hide him from the monsters. She was a jeweler. She built beautiful things, intricate and strong. Now she would build a shield. Clara sat on the floor of her small apartment, the curtains drawn tight against the gray Portland light. The maroon book was open in her lap. The amber lay on the floor beside her, its warmth surprisingly muted. Her goal was clear. The book called it Seidr, the weaving. She had to find the thread that connected her to Ben and hide it. But the book was not a manual. It was a poem. It spoke of quieting the forge of the mind, seeing with the heart's eye, and feeling the pull of the anchor. For an hour she tried. She closed her eyes and focused. She thought of Ben, pouring all her fear and love for him into the darkness. Nothing happened. She got a headache, and her frustration mounted. The power that had exploded from her in the alley, the power that had effortlessly bent metal, was now stubbornly, infuriatingly absent. She ran her hands through her hair, a sharp sigh escaping her. "Quiet the mind," she muttered. "How am I supposed to be quiet when he's a target?" The frustration itself was the problem. It was too loud. It was the forge, roaring and hot, drowning out the subtle work. She took a deep breath, and another. She was an artist. She knew what it was to need a steady hand. She couldn't solder a delicate joint when she was angry. This was the same. She put the amber aside. It was a key, yes, but she was the door. She didn't need its heat. She needed her own focus. She closed her eyes again. This time, she didn't try to find anything. She just listened. She listened to the hum of the mini fridge, the sound of a truck splashing through a puddle on the street below. She let the sounds wash over her, acknowledging them and then letting them go. Her mind, slowly, began to quiet. The roaring forge became a bed of coals. Now she thought of Ben, not with fear, not with a desperate need to protect. She thought of him simply. She pictured the gap in his teeth before he'd gotten braces. The way he always stole the last slice of pizza. The sound of his laugh when she'd given him his favorite comic book for his birthday. She thought of the pure, uncomplicated love she felt for him. And in the quiet darkness behind her eyes, the world shifted. It was not a vision, not like the Falconer. This was different. This was seeing. The darkness was no longer empty. It was filled with faint, shimmering, gossamer lines, like a spiderweb covered in dew. Thousands of them, millions. They were pale, silvery blue, the color of moonlight. They connected everything. She saw a faint line from her to her workbench downstairs. A thin, fragile line to her neighbor, Arthur. But one line was different. From the center of her chest, a single, brilliant thread emerged. It was not pale blue. It was a thick, vibrant cord of liquid gold, pulsing with a slow, powerful light. It was so bright it cast its own light on the other, paler threads. It stretched out from her, through the walls of her apartment, and out into the city. It was a beacon. The book was right. It was a blinding, beautiful, terrifying beacon. She could feel him at the other end, safe. He was in the university library, his head bent over a textbook, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He was bored and slightly hungry. The pure, mundane truth of it made her want to weep with relief. But the light. The Falconer would see this as easily as he'd see the sun. Weave, she whispered, her eyes still closed. Shield. The book had said she could mute the thread. She focused her will. She imagined herself a jeweler again. She imagined taking the pale, silvery blue threads of the background, the threads of normalcy, of nothing to see here, and weaving them around the golden cord. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The golden thread was pure, raw life. It resisted being hidden. It was like trying to gift wrap a star. Her first attempts were clumsy, and the shadow threads she wove simply evaporated in the intense light. She was sweating. The hollow, exhausted feeling was back, deeper this time. This was costing her. No, she grunted, focusing harder. Don't cover it. Just shade it, like a lampshade. She changed her tactic. She didn't try to hide the thread. She just tried to dim it. She wove a loose, intricate net, a crosshatch of shadow and pale light, and gently, carefully, draped it over the golden cord. The light didn't go out, but it faded. The blinding, searching beacon of a lighthouse was reduced. Now, it looked like a distant porch light, left on by accident. Still there if you knew exactly where to look, but no longer a screaming, "Here I am," to the entire world. The vision snapped. Clara fell forward onto her hands, gasping. Her entire body was trembling, as if she'd just run a marathon. Her clothes were damp with sweat. The room was just a room. The book was just a book. But she had done it. She looked at her hands, a jeweler's hands, calloused and capable. They were shaking, but she smiled. She had built her first shield. It wasn't permanent. She could feel the shade was fragile. It would need to be maintained, but it was a start. She had bought them time. Exhaustion, absolute and immediate, pulled her down. She crawled to her bed, not even bothering to pull back the covers, and fell onto the comforter. Her last conscious thought was not of the Falconer. It was of Arthur. She had a field guide. She had an anchor, and she had an ally. Tomorrow, the warrior would become a student. But tonight, the creator could rest. Clara woke up, not to her alarm, but to a silence so profound it was almost jarring. The world outside was muted, but the exhaustion she felt was total. It was a physical, aching void, as if the magical shade she had woven for Ben had been made from her own bone marrow. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting. Her first, panicked thought was for the thread. She closed her eyes. It took a moment, her mind sluggish and tired, but then the seeing returned. The web of pale, silver blue connections was there, and the golden cord to Ben, it was still dim. The shield had held. A wave of profound relief, so strong it made her dizzy, washed over her. She could feel him. He was in his dorm, probably just waking up, worrying about an upcoming exam and what to have for breakfast. Safe. Mundane. She forced herself to move, showering and dressing. She went downstairs to her shop. The familiar smell of coffee and metal polish was a comfort. The gilded bow looked the same. The silver wires were just wires. The hammers were just tools. But when she picked up a simple copper bracelet she'd been working on, a strange, new sensation prickled her fingers. Before, she understood the metal as an artist. She knew its tensile strength, its melting point, its color. Now, she felt it. She felt the memory of the fire that had smelted it. She felt the internal, crystalline structure. She felt its desire to be either rigid or fluid. It was no longer just an object. It was a potential. She put it down, unsettled. This new world was everywhere. She put a "be back soon" sign on her door, skipped coffee, and went straight to Arthur's. The bell on the dusty shelf chimed, and Arthur was there, as if he had been waiting right by the door. He wasn't in his usual soft cardigan. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt and a vest. The air of a gentle, bumbling scholar was gone, replaced by an efficient, focused energy. "You're tired," he stated. It wasn't a question. The weaving costs. It always costs. The shield held, Clara said. "Good. It is a temporary measure, but it is a good one. You are a fast learner." He gestured, not to the front desk, but to a small, curtained-off alcove in the back of the shop that she had never seen him use. Behind the curtain was a small, perfectly organized office. There was a large, modern desk, a computer, and covering one entire wall, a massive, incredibly detailed map of Portland. "You're not just a bookseller," Clara said, staring at the map. "No," Arthur agreed. "I am a keeper. A role, not a power.
We watch.
We archive. We see the patterns. When an echo awakens, we are here to offer context. A choice. A choice. To see the truth and engage with it," Arthur said, tapping the map, "or to try and ignore it. Ignoring it usually doesn't end well. The power, untended, burns its owner from the inside out. Or a hunter finds them." "The falconer," Clara said, the name like a stone in her mouth. "The falconer," Arthur confirmed. His face darkened. "He is an echo of the Sky Lords. A hunter, a king. He believes power is a privilege, one that should be held only by those he deems worthy. He doesn't just hunt, he collects. He sees us, all of us, as pieces on his game board." He turned to the map. It wasn't just a street map. It was covered in markings, circles, and faint, colored lines she hadn't noticed before. "This is the city as we see it," Arthur said. "This is a map of power." He pointed to the glass and steel skyscraper district downtown. It was circled in a cold, pale blue. His territory. The high places. The places of finance, law, and surveillance. He sees from there. He awakened, you shielded, and he lost you. He will be angry, and he will search. Clara's blood ran cold. Search how? He will look for disturbances. For other, unshielded sparks. He will look for you. Arthur then pointed to a different section of the map, a heavily industrial area down by the river, marked with a heavy, earthy brown. He is not your only neighbor. This is the territory of an Earthshaper, an echo of the forge, of the earth itself. We don't know who. They are quiet. They build. They endure. Probably a good person to leave alone. "So, what do I do?" Clara asked, feeling overwhelmed. "Hide in my apartment? Stop being?" "No," Arthur said, and for the first time, a small, fierce smile touched his lips. "You don't hide. You train. That alley, that was your power acting as a hammer. The shield you wove, that was a needle. You are an artist, Clara. You have fine control. You just need to build the muscle." He handed her a small, simple, unpolished block of tin. It was heavy and cold. "Your homework," he said. "Do not try to weave anything grand. Do not try to find more threads. That will draw attention. I want you to go back to your shop. Hold this. Do not try to force it. Just ask it. Ask it what? To be something else. Ask it to be a leaf, like your silver. Ask it to be a ring. Ask it to be a falcon. Then, ask it to be a block again. You are a hearthbinder. You shape, you create, you connect. The falconer sees. The Earthshaper endures. You, Clara, you transform. Now, you must learn to do it on command. Not just from fear or love, but from will. That is control. That is your next shield." Clara took the block of tin. It was a simple, stupid, ugly piece of metal. But as she held it, she could feel its potential, its quiet, internal structure. This was a language she understood. "I can do this," she said, her voice firm. "I know," said Arthur. "Now go. School is in session." Clara returned to the gilded bow, the simple, heavy block of tin in her coat pocket. She locked the door, flipped the closed sign, and muted her phone. The familiar, bright space of her workshop suddenly felt different. It was no longer just a place where she made jewelry. It was a forge. It was a laboratory. It was a training ground. She placed the tin block on her most used workbench, right in the pool of her brightest lamp. It sat there, dull and inert. It was an ugly, simple, uninspiring thing. "School is in session," she whispered to herself, repeating Arthur's words. She sat on her stool, her back straight, and took a deep breath. She remembered the frustration of trying to find Ben's thread. She would not make that mistake again. This was not about emotion. This was about will. She looked at the tin. "Be a leaf," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The tin remained a block. She frowned. "I command you to be a leaf." Nothing. Not a glimmer. She could feel the faint, warm hum of the amber under her shirt, but it was just watching, waiting. It offered no help. A spark of her old temper flared. "Bend, damn you." The metal stayed cold and stubborn. Clara sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The hammer. She was using the hammer again, and it wasn't working. This was not an enemy to be intimidated. She remembered Arthur's precise words. "Do not force it. Just ask it." And she remembered the sensation from that morning, holding the copper bracelet. She had felt its structure. She took another breath, letting the frustration drain out of her. She was a jeweler. She didn't just smash metal into shape. She annealed it. She guided it. She understood its limits and worked with them. She picked up the tin block. It was heavy in her palm. She closed her eyes. This time, she didn't command. She listened. She extended her new seeing sense, not outward to the city, but downward, into the metal. She felt its crystalline structure, its tinness. It was dense, low-melting, and wanted to be left alone. It was stubborn, but it wasn't strong. It was just lazy. She didn't try to change it. She just suggested. She held in her mind the image of her silver leaf, the one she had willed into existence. She showed the tin what she wanted. She didn't push. She invited. "Soften," she whispered, not with her voice, but with her mind. "Flow." A new sensation bloomed in her hand. The tin was suddenly, strangely warm. And under the skin of the metal, it was no longer solid. It felt like very thick, cold honey. Her eyes snapped open. The block was visibly sagging in her grip. It was working. Excitement, bright and sharp, shot through her. She focused, channeling that excitement into pure, creative will. She used her jeweler's precision, visualizing the stem, the central vein, the serrated edges. The metal flowed under her mental touch, thinning, spreading, curling. In 30 seconds, the block of tin was gone. In her hand lay a perfect, metallic tin leaf, its surface still dull, but its shape undeniable. She was breathing hard, but she wasn't exhausted. Not the bone-deep emptiness of the shield. This was different. This felt good. This felt like her. "Okay," she said, a shaky smile on her face. Now, the hard part. Arthur had said to return it to a block. To create was one thing. To uncreate, that was something else. She held the leaf. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the exact shape and density of the block. Its weight. Its simple, dull blockness. She pushed. Go back. The leaf resisted. It seemed to like its new form. It had purpose now. It was a leaf. A block was nothing. Clara realized her mistake. She was fighting its new nature. "No," she corrected herself. "You're not a leaf. You are potential. And I want your potential to be a block." She focused not on destroying the leaf, but on remembering the block into existence. It was slower this time. The metal groaned in her mind. The edges of the leaf thickened. The stem drew back into the main body. The intricate shape collapsed in on itself, becoming a lump, and then, with a final surge of her will, it settled. She opened her eyes. The block of tin was back in her palm, slightly warm, but a perfect block once more. She was tired now. That had cost her, but she had done it. She had an hour of daylight left. Arthur had said one more thing. Ask it to be a falcon. The word sent a chill through her. The falconer. This wasn't just homework. This was a test. She held the block. She thought of the vision. The sharp, aristocratic face, the winter blue eyes, and the beautiful, terrifying bird of prey. She thought of the name he had given her.
Quarry.
Her anger returned, but this time it was cold and sharp. It was the anger of the forge, not the bonfire. She showed the tin the image of the falcon. The metal resisted, as if it sensed the danger in the shape. "Flow," she commanded, and this time, her will was iron. The tin block melted in her hand. It grew. Wings, sharp and swept back. A cruel, hooked beak. Talons, sharp and ready. She poured all her fear and defiance into the shape. It formed, perfect and silent, a small, dull gray statue of a peregrine falcon in her hand. The moment the shape was complete, the air in her shop changed. The temperature didn't just drop. A pressure descended. It was the same feeling as the vision, but distant. It was a cold, high, thin feeling like the air at 10,000 feet. It was the feeling of being seen. She hadn't just created a symbol. She had, in the language of this new power, spoken a name. She had raised a flag. She felt a distant, mental thrum, like a plucked string. The falconer, he hadn't seen her, but he had felt his own sign. Somewhere, miles away in his glass tower, the hunter had just felt a ripple in his territory. Panic, absolute and icy, seized Clara. "No," she gasped, her will shattering the shape. She didn't try to make it a block. She just smashed it. The falcon collapsed into a gnarled, ugly lump of metal in her hand, the shape instantly broken. The pressure in the room vanished. Clara was left panting, the warm, ugly lump of tin clutched in her fist. She had learned the language, and her first word had been a curse. She had learned a new, terrible lesson. In this world, her art was a beacon. Her creations were a call, and she had just accidentally pinged the one person she needed to hide from. Clara stood in her shop, her fist clenched so tightly around the now formless lump of tin that her knuckles were white. The metal was still warm, a sickening, residual heat, but her skin was ice cold. She had done more than ping a hunter. She had, as she now understood it, stood on a hilltop in the middle of the night and lit a signal fire, all while desperately trying to hide. The silence of the shop was no longer comforting. It was heavy, oppressive, and felt thin, as if the barrier between her world and the falconers had been worn away, and all that was left was a fragile curtain. She couldn't stay here. She didn't bother with her coat. She grabbed the lump of tin, shoved it into her pocket, and ran out of her shop, not even stopping to lock the door. She burst into the dusty shelf, the antique bell jangling with a frantic, discordant sound that was entirely out of place in the quiet, dusty aisles. Arthur was in his back office, the one with the map. He looked up, his face immediately hardening with concern. "Clara, what did you do?" She was out of breath, half panicked. "The tin. I did what you said. I made a leaf. I made it a block again. And then I made a falcon." Arthur's face went pale. He stood up slowly, his hands resting on his desk. "Clara, child, what did you feel?" "Pressure," she gasped. "Cold, like the air at the top of a mountain. Like being seen. I broke it. I smashed the shape. It stopped." "Arthur, what did I do?" "You rang a bell," Arthur said, his voice grim. He came around the desk and shut the heavy wooden door to the back office, plunging them into a smaller, more contained silence. "You didn't just make a bird. You made his sigil. You used your own awakened, raw power to give form to his symbol." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "This is old magic, Clara. The deepest kind. Sympathetic magic. You created an icon, and by infusing it with Seidr, you created a link. A question. A new spark, just called out the name of one of the oldest hunters in the game. He didn't see you, not yet, but he heard the call. He felt the ripple, and he knows now the exact direction it came from." He pointed to the wall map, at the small, unremarkable neighborhood that contained their two shops. He was looking at the city. Now he's looking at this block. As if his words had summoned it, Clara felt a sudden, profound drop in temperature. It was not the air in the room. It was a pressure inside her head. The feeling from her shop was back. But this time, it wasn't a distant thrum. It was a sharp, focused needle of ice. It was a gaze. "He's here," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. She instinctively reached for the amber under her shirt. "No," Arthur hissed, his hand grabbing her wrist. Don't use your power. Don't shield. Don't even think loud." He's sweeping. He's looking for the spark he felt. The cold, probing sensation intensified. It was an intelligent, arrogant presence sweeping through the neighborhood, through the buildings, through the people. Clara felt it brush against her mind, and it felt utterly alien. It was the mental equivalent of a hawk's talon, sharp and unfeeling, turning over rocks to look for mice. "What do we do?" she breathed, too terrified to move. "Nothing," Arthur said, his own eyes closed. "Be a rock. Be a piece of paper. Be the dust in this room. He is looking for a fire. We must be cold ash." Clara had never known such violation. She could feel the Fólkvangr's sight moving, passing over the diner down the street, the dry cleaner, the apartments above them. It was dismissive, powerful. And then it was on them. The needle of ice focused. It wasn't on her, but on the shop, on the space they occupied. The pressure was immense. It felt like the gaze was trying to ignite any latent spark, to force it to reveal itself. Clara held her breath. She did what he said. She was not a warrior. She was not an artist. She was not a sister. She was a thing. A simple, dull, uninteresting thing. She poured all her will into being nothing. The pressure held for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Clara felt a bead of sweat roll down her temple. And then it was gone. It didn't fade. It snapped away, like a searchlight being switched off. The cold receded. The air in the room was just air again. Clara sagged against the wall, her legs giving out. "He's gone," Arthur said, his voice shaky. He looked older than he had just minutes before.
"He's gone.
For now." He missed us," Clara panted. "He missed a spark," Arthur corrected, his face grim. He was looking for a newborn echo, something bright and uncontrolled. "We were just dust. But he'll be back. He knows something is here. That ripple you made was too strong to be nothing." He looked at her, his kind eyes now hard with a new urgency. "Your training is over, Clara. Your lessons begin. You've learned to create, and you've learned to shield your anchor. Now you must learn to shield yourself. Your next lesson is not creation. It's obscurity. You need to learn to walk through the world looking to all other powers like nothing at all. You must learn to hide your fire, even while you use it." Clara looked at the lump of tin in her hand. It was the ugliest and most dangerous thing she had ever made. She had learned the language, and she had learned the price of speaking a single, powerful word aloud. The silence that followed the Fólkvangr's retreat was worse than the pressure. It was a vacuum, filled with the sound of Clara's own panicked breathing. She was slumped against the wall of Arthur's back office, the misshapen lump of tin clutched in her hand, now cold. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Arthur, I put this whole street in danger." Arthur took a steadying breath, the scholar's calm returning, but his eyes remained hard. "What's done is done. You made a mistake, Clara. You spoke a name you shouldn't have. But know this, you also survived. You held your fire when a Sky Lord was standing on your doorstep. That is not a small thing." He straightened his vest, a small, normalizing gesture that seemed to restore the room. "But you are correct. The danger is now immediate. He will be back, and he will be more subtle. He'll look for other signs. A ripple in the financial markets, a strange power surge, or just a person walking down the street who feels wrong. He will use his eyes, his falcons, and his human assets." "So what do I do?" Clara asked, pushing herself upright. "You said obscurity. How do I learn that? Is it in the book?" "It is," Arthur said. "But it's not a spell, Clara. It's not a weave. You can't put a shade on yourself as you did for Ben's thread. You are the fire. You can't shade a fire. You can only bank it." He went to his desk and opened a small, polished wooden box. Inside was a simple unlit candle. He placed it between them. "Your power, your echo, is awake now," he explained. "It wants to see. It wants to touch. It wants to create. When I was hiding just now, what did your power want to do?" Clara thought back to the agonizing seconds of the mental sweep. It wanted to fight. It wanted to push back. It wanted to build a wall. "I had to force it to be still." "Exactly," Arthur said. "And you did it through fear. That is a start. But you cannot live in a constant state of terror. You must learn to do it through will. You must learn to pull your entire aura, your spark, inward. So inward that you seem to be nothing at all." He looked at the unlit candle. "My own talents are very small. I am a keeper, a cataloger, but I have one small spark. Watch." Arthur placed his hand near the wick. He closed his eyes. Clara could feel a tiny, tiny pinprick of energy, like a single, warm thought. A small, orange flame appeared on the wick. The moment it appeared, Clara's own power surged. It was automatic, instinctive. The Seidr in her saw his magic, and it flared, hot and bright, wanting to connect, to analyze, to dominate. No, Arthur snapped, his eyes flying open. The flame vanished. I felt that. You lit up like a lighthouse. Bank it, Clara. Control it. Don't let your power react just because it sees another. Clara was breathing hard again, ashamed.
I didn't mean to.
It just happened. That is the lesson. It will just happen. Every time you pass another echo, every time you touch an object of power, every time your anchor, your brother, is in distress, your power will scream. And you must learn to make it whisper. You must become a gray stone, a drop of rain, utterly, perfectly uninteresting. Try again, he said, gesturing to the candle.
He lit it again.
That same tiny spark. This time, Clara was ready. When she felt the answering surge of her own power, that hot, bright flare of recognition, she didn't fight it. She contained it. She used her will, not as a hammer, but as a vessel. She pictured the power rising, and she built a box around it inside her mind. She let it flare, but she held the walls firm. She didn't push it down. She simply held it.
It was exhausting.
Her muscles tensed. A vein pulsed in her temple, but on the outside, she was still. Arthur watched her, his expression intense. The candle flame flickered. Good, he said, his voice low. I can't feel you. You're just Clara. Now hold it for 1 minute. It was the longest minute of her life. It was a new kind of magic. Not creation, not weaving, but suppression. It was pure, focused, internal control. It was the magic of the shield, not the sword. When Arthur finally nodded, Clara let her will relax. The box in her mind dissolved, and the power settled, like a banked fire, warm and low in her chest. She was shaking with the effort. That, Arthur said, blowing out the candle, is obscurity. It is your new homework, and it is the hardest lesson you will ever learn. He walked her to the door of the office. Go back to your shop. Open it. Be a jeweler. Go home tonight. See your brother for pizza as you planned. And every moment, every mundane, boring, normal moment you will practice. You will walk, talk, and sleep as a gray stone. Because as of today, Clara Mason, you are hiding in plain sight. Clara spent the entire day as a stranger in her own life. She opened the gilded bow on time. She brewed the coffee. She turned on the small radio, which played a local indie station. Everything was normal, and everything was a lie. Being a gray stone was the single most demanding act of creation she had ever undertaken. The first customer of the day was a woman looking for a birthday gift. As she browsed, Clara felt the familiar, now dangerous surge. The Seidr. It saw the woman's indecision, her desire to find something perfect for her sister. The power wanted to help. It wanted to guide her hand to the exact silver earrings that would match her sister's eyes. It wanted to connect. Clara crushed it. She held the power down, building the mental box, banking the fire. It left her feeling hollow and slightly dull. She smiled. The blue topaz is very popular, she said, her voice sounding flat to her own ears. It would look lovely on anyone. Her voice was not layered. Her eyes were not glowing. She was just a shopkeeper. The woman bought the earrings and left, and Clara had to lean against the counter, her forehead pressed against the cool glass, the effort of being normal already making her tired. She worked on a simple repair, a broken chain. The metal in her hands was a constant temptation. She felt it. She felt the weak link, the stressed molecules. Her power screamed at her. We can fix this in a second. Perfectly. Stronger than before. Let us flow. No, she whispered, her knuckles white. She picked up her pliers and her torch. She fixed it the old way. The human way. It took her 15 minutes, her hands steady, but the internal battle left her feeling like she'd run a race. The day crawled by. Every chime of the shop bell was a test. Every interaction was a performance. She was an artist, a creator, a warrior, forced to play the part of a rock. By the time she locked up the shop to meet Ben, she was more exhausted than she had been after the alley fight or the weaving of the shield. This constant, grinding suppression was a new kind of war. She met Ben at Scotto's Pizza, their old, reliable spot. The restaurant was loud, bright, and smelled of oregano and garlic. It was the most normal place in the world. And, to Clara, it felt like walking into the center of a volcano. Ben was her anchor. The moment she saw him, laughing as he grabbed a booth, her power didn't just flare. It exploded. The golden thread she had shielded was no longer a distant line. It was a sun. The Seidr in her surged, a massive, joyful, protective wave that wanted to wrap around him, to bless him, to guard him. The light inside her, the banked fire, roared to life, threatening to break free. "Hey," Ben called, waving. "I already ordered a large pepperoni." Clara walked toward the booth, and every step was a battle. She was building the box, stamping down the fire, holding back the sun. The effort was so immense it made her vision swim. She smiled. It felt like her face was cracking. "You look awful," Ben said, his smile faltering as she sat down. "Are you getting sick? You're really pale." "Just a long day," she managed to say, the words feeling thick. "Headache. You know, repairs." "Ah," he said, sympathetic. "Well, pizza fixes everything." The dinner was torture. Ben talked about his classes, a professor he couldn't stand, a girl in his history lab he thought was cute. He was vibrant and happy and alive. And the power in Clara screamed at her. "He is your anchor, your charge, your joy. Let us shine." And she had to sit there, a gray stone, and say, "That's great, Ben. Did you finish your paper on the trade routes?" Every time she looked at him, she was slamming a vault door in her mind. She was protecting him by holding back the very power he had awakened in her. The power of love was the one thing she could not, under any circumstances, show. She was so focused on suppression that she almost missed the change. Halfway through the meal, the door to the pizzeria opened. Two men in dark suits walked in. They were not from the neighborhood. They were wrong. Like her, they were playing a part, but their part was normal businessman, and it was a bad fit. They didn't look at the menu. They scanned the room. Their eyes were cold. Clara's blood turned to ice. They weren't echoes. They weren't like her or the Fólkvangr. They were human assets. Arthur had warned her. One of them looked at their table. Clara didn't move. She didn't flinch. She took a bite of pizza, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. She was a stone, a rock, a boring girl with a headache, eating pizza with her brother. She held. The man's gaze slid past her, dismissive. He and his partner took a table by the window, ordered 2 black coffees, and watched the street. They weren't looking for her. They were just watching. The Fólkvangr had sent his mundane eyes to her block. "Those guys are creepy," Ben muttered, noticing them. "They're just guys, Ben," Clara said, her voice miraculously steady. She slid another slice of pizza onto her plate, her hand not shaking at all. Inside, the fire was banked, but the warrior was wide awake. The pizza sat in Clara's stomach like a lead weight. Every bite she had forced down was a part of the performance. "Look at me. I am normal. I am eating." Ben was oblivious, deep into a story about his professor's terrible jokes. Clara nodded, smiled, and held. She held the fire down. She was a gray stone, and inside her, a star was trying to go supernova. The 2 men in suits were the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Far worse than Rick and Tony. They were a dispassionate, organized threat. They didn't look angry. They just looked attentive. They drank their black coffee, and their eyes, cold and assessing, swept the street outside, then the interior of the pizzeria, then the street again. They were a net, waiting for a fish to jump. And then he said, Ben was saying, "Get it? The Roman Empire wasn't built in a day, but my lecture notes were." Nobody laughed. Ben laughed. "Isn't that awful?" "Terrible," Clara said, and her voice was a perfect imitation of a slightly tired, amused older sister. The effort it took to produce that single word almost made her head split. "Anyway, I should get back," Ben said, finally. "That paper isn't going to write itself." "This was great, Clara. Thanks. I'm glad you're feeling better." "Me too," she lied, sliding out of the booth. This was the test. Moving. They stood up. She gathered her jacket. She did not look at the men. She could feel their gaze, a casual, professional sweep. A young woman and her brother. Students. Normal. She and Ben walked to the front register to pay. It was right next to the window, right next to them. Clara's heart was a cold, hard knot. She could feel the Seidr in her, coiled like a snake. It wanted to see these men. It wanted to know their names, their fears, their weaknesses. It was a weapon begging to be drawn, and she had to force it, command it, to be nothing. She was a jeweler. She was a woman paying for pizza. She smiled at the cashier, handed over her card, and signed the slip. Her hand was perfectly steady. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of the men tap his phone. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the street. But the timing was suspect. "Have a good night," she said to the cashier. They walked out the door. The cold, damp Portland air hit her face, a welcome shock. She and Ben stood on the sidewalk for a moment. "You're sure you're okay?" Ben asked, pulling up his hood. "You seem, I don't know, distant." "Just tired, Ben." "Really?" she said, forcing a genuine warmth she didn't feel. "Now go. Get that paper done. And be careful." "Careful," he laughed. "It's just a paper on trade routes. I'll see you Sunday?" "Sunday," she agreed. She hugged him. The physical contact was a jolt, like touching a live wire. The golden thread between them, the anchor bond, flared with a light so brilliant that for a second, she was terrified the men inside the pizzeria would see it. She crushed the power, banked the fire, held it down with all her will. The hug was over in a second. "Love you," he said, already turning. "Love you, too," she whispered. She watched him walk away, his backpack slung over one shoulder, disappearing around the corner, back to his normal, safe, student life. The moment he was gone, the performance was over. But the gray stone had to stay. She was alone on the street. The men were still in the pizzeria, watching. She could not use her Seidr sight to see if she was being followed. She could not use her power to move faster or to hide. She had to walk back to her shop, a normal, tired jeweler, on a dark, wet street that was now enemy territory. Every shadow was a threat. Every distant footstep was a follower. The 2 blocks to her shop felt like 20 miles. She walked, keys in hand, her gaze down. She did not run. Running was suspicious. She got to her door. She unlocked it. She slipped inside. She locked the 3 deadbolts. She stood in the darkness of her apartment, her back to the door, for a full minute, just breathing. And then, the gray stone shattered. The power she had been suppressing all day, all evening, exploded. It was not a controlled release. It was a desperate, painful, psychic rebound. A wave of uncontrolled Seidr washed through the room. The lights in her apartment didn't just flicker. They popped, showering the floor in glass and sparks. The silver wires in her shop downstairs screamed, a high-pitched, metallic vibration that she felt in her teeth. The amber on her chest, which had been silent, flared with a heat so intense it burned her skin, forcing her to rip it off and throw it across the room. She collapsed to her knees in the darkness, panting as the wave of power finally receded. She was shaking violently, not from fear, but from the backlash. She had held the line. She had protected Ben. She had fooled the Watchers. But the cost was enormous. She couldn't do this every day. She couldn't live in a state of constant, perfect suppression. The power would not be suppressed. It would either be used, or it would tear her apart. She crawled in the darkness, found the still glowing amber, and picked it up. She had a new choice to make. Hiding was no longer an option. She couldn't be a rock. She was a fire. She had to learn to look like an ember, but burn like a star. Clara sat on the floor of her dark apartment for a long time, the only light coming from the street lamps below and the faint, troubled glow of the amber in her fist. The air smelled of burnt ozone from the popped light bulbs. Her skin, where the amber had burned her, was a painful, stinging red. The backlash had been terrifying, more so than the men in the pizzeria. The men were an external threat. This was a civil war. Her own power, herself, had turned on her for being denied. She looked at the angry red mark on her chest. "You are a fire," she thought. "You can't pretend to be a rock. A fire that isn't fed. It just burns its container." She knew what she had to do. Hiding wasn't working. Suppression was a ticking bomb. She put the amber on its leather cord back around her neck, the stone's heat a painful counterpoint to the cold room. She didn't bother with her coat. She unlocked her deadbolts, went downstairs, and crossed the alcove to Arthur's. She used the spare key he had given her, letting herself into the dusty shelf. The shop was dark, smelling of paper and time. In the back, Arthur's voice called out, calm, as if he expected her. She found him in his office, not at his desk, but in a comfortable armchair, reading a thick book under a single green-shaded lamp. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes immediately went to the red mark on her neck. He said nothing, just closed his book and waited. They were there, Clara said, her voice flat, exhausted. At the pizzeria. 2 men. Not echoes. Human. Watching the street. They looked right past us. Arthur nodded, his face grim. The Watchers. So, the falconer has marked this territory. He is patient. He will watch for weeks. He will wait for one person to make one mistake. I didn't, Clara said, her voice trembling. I held it. I was a gray stone. All through dinner. Ben saw nothing. They saw nothing. But, Arthur prompted gently, looking again at her neck. But when I got home, she whispered, it all broke. The power. It was like a tidal wave. It blew out my lights. The metal in my shop. I heard it. It hurt. Arthur, it tried to tear me apart because I wouldn't use it. Arthur stood and walked to his map. He stared at it for a moment. You are a hearthbinder, Clara, he said softly. You are an echo of creation and connection. You are not a skylord, built for the cold, empty spaces of suppression. You are a forge. A forge must burn. If you try to cap the chimney, you will blow the house apart. So, what do? She pleaded. If I hide, I explode. If I don't hide, the falconer's men will see me. If I use my power, he will feel me. It's a trap. Every choice is a trap. No, Arthur said, turning back to her. You're thinking like a warrior. Think like an artist. You're a jeweler. What do you do when you have a brilliant, fiery, dangerous gemstone, one that is too wild to be worn? Clara thought for a second. I said it. I build a setting that protects the wearer, controls the stone, and focuses its light. Exactly, Arthur said, a thin smile on his lips. You must set your power. You cannot just be a gray stone, a simple, boring rock. That is a costume. You must become a geode, a dull, uninteresting rock on the outside, but lined with crystals on the inside. He pointed toward her shop, through the wall. Your workshop. It is your greatest defense. It is your setting. The falconer is looking for power spikes. He is not looking for a jeweler who is good at her job. A new, fragile understanding dawned on Clara. You mean, I should use it? Now? While they're watching? You must use it, Arthur corrected. You must feed the fire, or it will consume you. But you will do it quietly. You will go to your workbench. You will create. You will shape the metal. You will pour your power into it. And as you do, you will simultaneously practice obscurity. You will hold the gray stone cloak, not around you, but around your entire shop. You will build a shield of notice that says nothing to see here, while inside that shield, your power works. He called it the hidden forge. She would be hiding in plain sight, using her mundane profession as the perfect cover for her magical practice. The power would be sated, preventing a backlash. The work would be hidden. You are a creator, Clara, Arthur said, his voice firm. So, create. Create your art. Create your shield. Create your defense. Let the falconer's men watch an empty street. Let them see a closed shop. They will never see the armory you are building right under their noses. The fear in Clara's chest didn't vanish, but for the first time, it was joined by something else. Resolve. This she understood. This was her craft. She nodded. A geode, she said. Okay, I can do that. She left Arthur's office and walked back, not to her apartment, but to the front door of the Gilded Bow. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it behind her. She didn't turn on the main lights, just her single workbench lamp. The shop was quiet. She sat on her stool, the silver wires and blocks of metal waiting. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, she willingly called her power. Clara sat at her workbench, the rest of the shop lost in shadow. The single, bright lamp cast a pool of light, isolating her and the tools of her trade. Outside, the city of Portland was a muted hum of rain and distant traffic. The watchers were out there. The falconer was in his tower. And she was here. A geode, she whispered, her voice sounding loud in the silence. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since this had begun, she didn't just let the power rise, she drew it. It came willingly, a warm, bright flood of Seidr. The amber on her chest pulsed in time with her heart, and the air around her thrummed. The metal on her bench, the silver, the copper, the raw, ugly lump of tin, all vibrated in response. The fire was lit. Now, for the second, harder part, the shell. She tried to do both at once. She picked up a thick piece of bronze wire and, as she began to ask it to flow, she also tried to project the gray stone field. It was an immediate jarring failure. The moment she focused on the bronze, her concentration on the shield broke. Her power flared, bright and sharp, like a camera flash in the darkness. She could feel it, a shout of magic that echoed in the non-physical world. Panicked, she yanked her will back, and the bronze, which had just begun to soften, instantly became cold, stubborn metal. She tried again, reversing the priority. She focused first on the gray stone, building the mental box, the cloak of obscurity. But the moment the dullness set in, the Seidr she was trying to send to the bronze was choked off. The fire was banked so low, it couldn't even warm the metal. She was either a shield or she was a forge. She couldn't be both. No, she gritted, frustrated. Think like an artist. A geode. You build the shell first. Then you work inside. She put the bronze down. She would not touch her tools. She would not touch her metal. This first step required all her focus. She closed her eyes. She drew on her power, but not to create.
She drew on it to hide.
She pictured her shop. The brick walls, the glass front, the small apartment above. She pulled her gray stone cloak, that magic of nothingness, and stretched it. It was like trying to stretch a single piece of cloth over a whole house. It was thin, it tore, it resisted. She had to pull more. She pictured the watchers, their cold, dismissive eyes. She poured her will into being uninteresting. She didn't just hide herself. She hid the shop. She wove a shield of notice, a field of pure, mundane boredom. She projected the feeling of a closed business, an empty building, of dust settling in the dark. It was an immense, grinding effort. The power was not meant for this. It wanted to sing, and she was forcing it to be silent. But it was working. She could feel the geode shell forming, a dull, gray field that encapsulated the entire building, containing her. Now, she was inside the shield. The forge was hidden. Now, she thought, her brow beaded with sweat. I work. She opened her eyes. The strain was immense. It was like trying to paint a miniature while treading water in a heavy current. But the shell was holding. She picked up the thick, bronze wire. This was her food for the fire. She had to feed the beast, or it would eat the cage.
Flow.
She commanded the metal, her Seidr flowing into it. The metal was sluggish, muffled by the shield, but it listened. The fire inside her, which had been a raging, rebellious inferno, now had a task. It poured from her into the bronze, and the backlash feeling, the pressure in her skull, began to ease. She was creating. She was hiding. She was doing both. For hours, she worked. The city outside went from late night to the pre-dawn quiet. She didn't just bend the wire. She became the forge. She held the bronze in her bare hands, and with her will alone, she softened it, drew it, shaped it. She wasn't making jewelry. The power demanded something more. It was the Brinja, the battle skin, that wanted to be born. She wove the bronze wire into a thick, intricate band. She shaped it to her own form, a perfect, custom fit. It was a bracer. She poured her art into it, not just her power. She wove the metal into complex, flowing knots, patterns that looked, at first glance, like simple decoration, but were, in the language of the Seidr, patterns of warding and strength. As the last piece settled, as the bronze cooled into its final, powerful shape, the sun was just beginning to touch the horizon. Clara let the geode shield dissolve. The strain vanished, leaving her utterly, completely, and satisfyingly exhausted. It was the deep, weary calm of a hard day's work, not the hollow void of suppression. She held the bronze bracer up in the first light. It was beautiful. It was a piece of art, but it was also the first piece of her new armor. It was a tangible thing, made of her will, her art, and her magic. She had survived the night. The fire was fed. The shield had held. The Fólkvangr's men were watching an empty street, and they had missed the creation of the first piece in her armory. She was no longer just a jeweler. She was a weaponsmith, and she was just getting started. Dawn in Portland is not a grand event. It is a slow, gray lifting of the darkness. Clara sat at her workbench, the first weak light filtering through the front window, illuminating the beautiful, terrible thing in her hands. The bronze bracer was heavy. It was a solid, tangible piece of her will. The intricate, flowing knots she had woven into the metal were not just decorative. They seemed to catch the light, to hold it, to draw it in. It was still warm from her magic, and it felt alive. It hummed, a low, resonant note just beneath the range of hearing, a note she felt in her bones. This was the Brinja, the battle skin. With a trembling hand, she slid it onto her left forearm. It was a perfect fit, molded to her own arm. The moment the metal settled against her skin, the world shifted. The wild, chaotic, rebellious fire of her Seidr, which she had been fighting and caging and struggling to control, suddenly settled. It didn't go out. It didn't diminish. It focused. If her power had been a roaring, uncontrolled bonfire, the bracer was a forge, capturing the heat and channeling it into a single, steady, white-hot flame. The anxious, vibrating energy that had plagued her for days vanished, replaced by a deep, grounded, powerful calm. She felt anchored. She took a breath. For the first time since the amber had awakened her, her own power felt like a part of her, not a hostile invader. She felt the exhaustion, of course. She had worked all night, but it was the clean, honest exhaustion of an artist who has just finished a masterpiece. She stood, rolling down the sleeve of her shirt to cover the bracer. It was a hidden, heavy secret, but it was hers. She cleaned her shop, made coffee, and prepared for the day. The routine was the same. She was not. When Arthur's shop opened, she went over. He was at his front counter, sorting a stack of new arrivals. He looked up, and his eyes were tired, but sharp. He didn't ask how she was. He simply looked at her, assessing. Clara didn't say a word. She just rolled up her left sleeve. The bracer seemed to drink the dusty light of the bookshop. Arthur's eyes widened, just for a second. He reached out a hand, but stopped, his fingers hovering an inch above the metal. He wasn't looking at the art. He was feeling the power. The first piece of the battle skin, he breathed, his voice full of a new respect. You didn't just feed the fire, Clara. You harnessed it. It makes it quiet, Clara said, trying to find the words. The power. It's not fighting me anymore. It is a focus, Arthur explained, finally lowering his hand.
A tool.
The Seidr is wild. You have given it a home, a channel. The power has a place to sit, rather than tearing its way out. You will find the gray stone, your obscurity, much easier to hold now. The bracer, it will absorb the excess. It will ground you. He looked at her, his expression turning serious once more. This is a magnificent first step, Clara. You have forged your first true shield. But do not be fooled. This, he tapped a heavy, leather-bound history book, is a world of swords. The Falconer will not be impressed by your shield. He will simply see it as a new, interesting challenge. So what now? She asked. Now you live, Arthur said. You live your double life. You are the jeweler. You are the gray stone. You are the normal, mundane, boring woman. And at night, in your hidden forge, you will continue to build. You will train. You will feed the fire, and you will arm yourself, piece by piece. Clara nodded, pulling her sleeve down. A geode, she said, repeating his lesson. Precisely, he said. Now go. Open your shop, sell your art, and let them watch. Clara walked back to the gilded bow. She unlocked the door, flipped the open sign, and let the day begin. Around noon, she felt it, a cold, familiar pressure on the street. She looked up, as if idly, through her front window. One of the watchers from the pizzeria was walking by. He didn't come in. He didn't even stop. He just walked past, his gaze sweeping the street, his phone in his hand. Clara's heart, which should have been pounding, gave one solid, heavy thud. The man's eyes grazed her shop window, passed right over her, and kept going. He saw nothing. Just a closed shop front, a boring building. The geode shell was holding. Clara looked down at her hands, pretending to adjust a display. She was not a rock. She was not prey. She was a fortress. She was a hidden forge. And she was armed. The man disappeared around the corner. The performance was working. But the actress was no longer afraid. A new routine settled over Clara's life, as quiet and persistent as the Portland rain. By day, she was the geode shell. She was Clara Mason, the jeweler. The bronze bracer, hidden beneath her sleeve, was a secret furnace, grounding her power, absorbing the excess, and making the gray stone act of obscurity almost effortless. The watchers became a familiar sight, like the mailman or the traffic wardens. They walked by, sat in the diner, lingered on the corner. They saw nothing. But at night, her shop became the hidden forge. The geode shell would rise, a silent, invisible bubble of nothing to see here, and inside, the artist would become the armorer. She worked. She had to. The power demanded it, and her survival depended on it. She was building her Brinja piece by piece. She had finished the second bracer, a perfect twin to the first, woven with patterns of shielding. They were her foundation, her focus. From there, she moved on. She was a jeweler, not a blacksmith. She didn't work in steel plate. She worked in Seidr. She began to weave thin, flexible, incredibly strong chains of silver and copper, reinforced with her will, designing a shirt. It was not a heavy, medieval mail, but something that looked like a delicate, artistic garment, yet was imbued with the power of the battle skin. But the armor was not enough. The bracers quieted her power, but Arthur's maroon book, which she now studied every night, spoke of more. The Seidr was not just for forging and shielding. It was for seeing. The book called it Vardlocker, or ward seeing. The ability to not just see the threads, but to follow them, to see what was at the other end. Clara had seen the Falconer by accident, a raw, uncontrolled vision. She had seen Ben to shield him. Now, she needed to see her enemy. Not the Falconer, that was too dangerous, but his watchers. One night, inside her hidden, warded forge, she sat, her hands still. She was not forging. She was hunting. She pictured the face of the watcher who had passed her window, the one with the cold eyes and the phone. She quieted the forge, as the book said, and opened her Seidr sight. The web of silver blue threads appeared. She was no longer afraid of it. She found her own brilliant, golden thread to Ben, still safely shaded. She found her thin, respectful thread to Arthur. And then she looked for something else. She looked for a thread of connection to the Watcher. She had none. He was a stranger. Think like an artist, not a warrior, she told herself. You don't have to be connected to him. You just have to find his thread in the web. She focused on her memory of him, the way he walked, the set of his jaw. She pushed that image out like a question. And the web, it responded. A single, pale, uninteresting thread, one among millions, seemed to thrum. It was his. She had it. Her heart pounded. She was terrified of what she might find. Would she see the Falconer? Would he see her? She took a breath, holding the geode shield of her shop tight. She reached out with her mind, and she pulled. The vision was not sharp and terrifying like the Falconer's. It was grainy. It felt like she was looking through a misty window. The thread led her out of her neighborhood, across one of the bridges, and into a sterile, modern apartment building downtown. She saw him, the Watcher. He was sitting on a gray, generic sofa. He was out of his suit, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. His shoes were by the door. On the coffee table, there was an empty pizza box and a can of domestic beer. He was watching a basketball game on a large television, his expression bored. He was a man. Just a man. He was not an echo. He was not magical. He was not a hunter. He was an employee. He got up, stretched, and walked to his kitchen, scratching his stomach. He opened the fridge. Clara could see his grocery list stuck to the door with a cartoon magnet. Milk.
Eggs. Bread.
A new kind of cold, far deeper than the Falconer's magical pressure, settled on Clara. This was not a war of magic against magic. The Falconer was not just a mythic figure. He was a man with money. He had organization.
He had systems.
He wasn't just a hunter. He was a CEO. He paid men, normal, mundane men, to be his eyes. He used the normal, human world as his personal surveillance network. Clara pulled her vision back, the thread snapping away. She was in her shop, the smell of hot metal and ozone around her. She looked at the magical, glowing, intricate bracers on her arms. She looked at the half-finished Brinja of woven, warded wire on her bench. It was art. It was magic. It was her power. And she realized, with a sickening lurch, that it might not be enough. How could she, a single artist in a small shop, fight an echo who commanded not just the unseen, but the mundane world of money, men, and power? This was no longer a battle. This was a war, and she was impossibly outnumbered. Clara sat in the hidden forge. The vision of the Watcher's apartment burned into her mind. The list on his fridge, the brand of his beer, the cartoon magnet. She looked down at her own hands, at the two intricate, glowing, bronze bracers that held the power of a goddess. She looked at the half-finished shirt of warded, silver-woven wire on her bench. This was her Brinja, her battle skin. It was a masterpiece of Seidr, a fortress of magic. And it felt, in that moment, as useless as a paper shield in a fire. The Falconer wasn't just a magical entity. He was a corporation. He wasn't just a hunter. He was a boss. He had a payroll. He had assets. How did a magic bracer stop a wire transfer? How did a warded shirt stop a background check? This was a new, cold, and far more profound terror. The magic she was so desperately trying to control, it wasn't the language of the entire war. It was just one dialect, and the Falconer was fluent in all of them. She felt a cold sickness rise in her. He could find Ben, not with magic, but with a $500 check to a private investigator. He could find his school, his grades, his social security number. He could do to her, to the Gilded Bow, what he had done to Rick and Tony, but on a different scale. He could have her evicted. He could have her audited by the IRS. He could ruin her, mundanely, and never once have to use his own power. She put the silver wire down. The forge went cold. She had to talk to Arthur. She didn't bother with the geode shell. It was nearly 4 in the morning. She slipped out of her shop and into the dusty shelf, her fear a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She found him in his back office, asleep in his armchair, a blanket draped over his knees. The map of Portland was his only witness. She felt a pang of guilt, but she gently touched his shoulder. Arthur. He woke instantly, his eyes clear and sharp, the gentle old man gone. Clara, what is it? What did you see? I used the Vard locker, she said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a chilling, new anger. I followed the thread. One of the watchers. Arthur, he's just a guy. He's a man named Michael. He lives in the Pearl District. He likes pepperoni pizza, and he's on a payroll. The Falconer is just paying him. Arthur's expression did not change. He was not surprised. He simply nodded, as if she had just confirmed the most obvious and most terrible of truths. Yes, Arthur said, his voice quiet. This is the lesson you cannot find in the Maroon Book. You have seen the Falconer's true strength. Not his magic, Clara. His mundanity. But how do I fight that? She asked, her voice breaking with frustration. I'm a jeweler. I have magic. I can't fight money. I can't fight a man who uses the real, normal world as his personal armory. Arthur stood up and walked, not to his map, but to his desk. He tapped his finger on the top of his computer. It was a modern, high-spec machine, starkly out of place among the ancient, leather-bound tomes. How do you think I survive, Clara? He asked. How do you think a keeper hides? Not with magic. Not alone. He turned on the monitor. The Falconer is an echo of a Skylord. A king. A CEO. He governs. He commands. He has a network. But you, Arthur said, turning to her, you are an echo of a hearthbinder. You connect. You forge. You weave. You just think you can only weave metal. Clara looked at him, confused. What are you saying? He has watchers, Arthur said, but we have friends. He has a payroll. We have community. We are the invisible. We are the keepers. The librarians, the IT specialists, the baristas, the city planners. The people who are so normal that we are never ever seen. He has a network of power. We have a network of information. He opened a file on his computer. It was a complex, encrypted database. You have a new weapon, Clara. Your Seidr. You thought it was for seeing magic.
No.
It is for seeing connections. You saw the Watcher. You saw his apartment.
You saw his humanity.
The Falconer sees him as a piece on a board. You saw his thread. That is a far more powerful weapon. A new, dangerous idea began to form in Clara's mind. I could follow his threads. Not just to him, but from him to the others. Exactly, Arthur said, his eyes bright. He has a mundane network. You can map it, magically. You can see who he talks to, who pays him. You can see the entire, invisible structure. He is using the mundane world against you. You will use your magic to conquer the mundane world. Clara felt a new, cold, and powerful resolve. Her fear was replaced by a sharp, jeweler's focus. She had been forging armor to protect her body. Now, she would forge a weapon to protect her life. She looked at the bronze bracer on her arm. She looked at the modern computer on Arthur's desk. She returned to her shop just as the gray light of dawn was breaking. She sat at her workbench. The half-finished silver wire shirt was on one side. She pulled out her own laptop and set it on the other. The Brinja and the computer. The ancient magic and the modern world. The hidden forge now had a new, and far more dangerous, purpose. She was no longer just an armorer. She was becoming a spy. Clara's knights were now a ritual of opposites, a blend of the ancient and the hypermodern. Her workbench was split. On the left lay the tools of the Seidr, her warded, half-finished silver shirt, the bronze bracers she now wore constantly, and the amber, her key. On the right sat her mundane weapon, a slim, powerful laptop, plugged into a surge protector. Tonight, she began, as always, with the shield. She sat on her stool, and with a now-practiced will, drew the geode shell around her shop. The gray stone cloak of nothingness settled, a bubble of boring that would hide her from the watchers. Inside the shell, the forge was lit. Her power, grounded by the bracers, rose steady and warm, ready to work. But tonight, she did not reach for the silver wire. She opened the laptop. She had created a single, heavily encrypted, offline file. A simple text document. At the top, she had typed one name, the fruit of her last Vardlocker session, Michael, the Watcher. It was time to map the network. She closed her eyes. Her Seidr sight opened, and the dark apartment behind her eyelids was once again filled with the infinite, shimmering, silver-blue web of connections. She found the golden, shaded thread to Ben. She found the respectful, thin thread to Arthur. And now, she looked for the thread she had bookmarked in her mind. The thread of the Watcher. Michael. It was easier this time. It was a dull, pale thread, but she knew its shape. She reached out with her will, but she did not pull on it. She did not want to see his apartment again. She wanted to see his attachments. She was no longer a weaver. She was an arachnologist studying the web. She stood at the junction of Michael's thread and looked at what it was connected to. The threads to his family were distant and thin. The threads to his few friends were weak.
But then she saw it.
A new kind of thread. It was not gold, love, or silver blue acquaintance. It was a dull, ugly, metallic color, like a length of rusted iron rebar. It was thick, rigid, and had no light of its own. It was a thread of obligation, a thread of payment. Her heart hammered. This was it. This was the connection. She focused on the iron thread. She would not follow it to its source. Not yet. That felt too dangerous, like staring directly into the falconer's eyes. But she could analyze it. She pushed her Seidr against it. She listened, and she heard data. It wasn't a vision. It was a download. A name, whispered in her mind, PNW Logistics Solutions. It was not a magical name. It was the most boring, corporate, anonymous name she had ever heard. It was perfect. She opened her eyes, her fingers flying to the keyboard. She typed, under Michael's name, Iron Thread, obligation/payment-source, PNW Logistics Solutions. She was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, exhilarating power. This was her language. She was a hearthbinder. She was connecting. She wasn't done. She stayed in her Seidr sight, her eyes closed, her hands on her keyboard, a strange, new kind of oracle. She was still inside her geode, safe. She looked at the PNW Logistics note in her mind. It wasn't a person. It was a hub. It was a dead, dark nexus. And from it, other iron threads radiated outward. This is his network, she realized. The peril. She saw Michael's thread, and right next to it, 6 others, all the same ugly, iron rust color, all radiating out into the city. She had found the Watchers. All of them. Okay, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp in the quiet shop. Let's put names to the threads. She reached out and touched the first new thread. Pull. A face. A man she didn't know. He was in his car, parked on a high ridge in the West Hills, looking down on the city through binoculars. His thread was strong. She opened her eyes. She typed, Watcher 2, male, 40s. Location, West Hills Overlook. Role, the lookout. She closed her eyes. The second thread. Pull. Another man, younger. He was at a computer in a small, messy office. He wasn't watching the street. He was watching code. He was a data analyst. She typed, Watcher 3, male, 20s. Location, downtown office. Role, the analyst. She was mapping them, one by one. The anger and fear were burning away, replaced by a cold, sharp, jeweler's focus. She was taking her enemy's faceless, mundane army, and she was making them known. She came to the last thread. It felt different, newer. It was thinner, but it vibrated with a nervous energy. She reached out her will.
Pull.
The vision snapped into focus. It was a woman. She was in her early 20s, sitting in a nondescript sedan. She was parked, her engine off, the radio playing low. Clara saw, through the woman's windshield, the street sign. She knew the street. She felt the blood drain from her face, and her stomach turned to ice. It was not her street. It was not downtown. It was the street outside Ben's dormitory. The Falconer hadn't just put eyes on her. He had put eyes on her anchor. She snapped out of the vision, her hands flying to her laptop. Watcher 7, female, 20s. Location, university campus. Role, anchor surveillance. She slammed the laptop shut. The hidden forge was no longer a refuge. It was a war room, and the war wasn't coming. It was already here. The laptop slammed shut with a sharp, plastic crack that echoed in the silent, hidden forge. Clara was on her feet, a strangled cry of pure, undiluted terror caught in her throat. The world narrowed to a single, pulsing, horrifying fact. Watcher 7, university campus. Anchor surveillance.
He was watching Ben.
All the cold, methodical focus of the spy master, the mapmaker, vanished. The warrior, the Brísingamen protector, surged to the front. Her power, contained so placidly by the bronze bracers, exploded. The Seidr didn't just rise, it detonated. It was a white-hot, blinding, primal scream of mine. The bracers on her arms became scalding hot, the metal straining to contain the sheer, raw force of her will. She had a single, overwhelming instinct. Go.
Go now. Get Ben.
Hide him. Kill the woman in the car. She was halfway to the door, her hand on the deadbolt, before Arthur's training, the ingrained discipline of the gray stone, finally caught her. She froze, her entire body trembling with the colossal effort of stopping herself. He has put a sensor on your anchor. This was the thought, Arthur's imagined voice, that cut through the panic. The woman in the car. She wasn't just there to watch Ben. She was there to watch Ben be reacted to. She was a tripwire. If Clara ran out of her shop at 4 a.m, drove like a madwoman to the university, and grabbed her brother, the tripwire would be broken. The Falconer would get a notification. Target confirmed. She would be painting the bullseye on Ben's back herself. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She was trapped. She was a warrior, armed and armored, who could not, under any circumstances, join the battle. She backed away from the door, her movements jerky. She was vibrating with suppressed, terrified energy. She couldn't go, but she couldn't stay. She grabbed her phone. Her thumb hovered over Ben's contact. Call him. Tell him to lock his door. Tell him he's not safe.
No.
The Falconer was not stupid. The watcher outside was the analyst. There was the lookout. There would also be the listener. He would be monitoring Ben's phone. A panicked, cryptic call from his sister in the middle of the night. Target confirmed. Every path was a trap. Every instinct she had as a protector was now the very thing that would endanger him. She paced her small shop, her feet silent, a caged, magical, desperate animal. She had to tell Arthur. This time, she built the geode shell with a speed and ferocity she didn't know she possessed. It was not a boredom field. It was an empty field. A void. She threw the cloak of obscurity over herself and slipped out her door. She found Arthur in his office, as if he hadn't moved. He was drinking tea, his face a mask of calm. He's watching Ben, she said. No preamble. Her voice was a low, shaking hiss. A woman, outside his dorm.
Right now.
I saw her thread. Arthur's face did not change, but his eyes were filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. So, he said, setting the teacup down with a perfectly steady hand. The test has begun. What do I do? Clara demanded, her voice cracking. Every single thing I do, it confirms the link. If I go to him, if I call him, if I do anything, he'll know. He'll know Ben is my anchor. Yes, Arthur said simply. So, I do nothing, she screamed, her whisper echoing in the small, book-filled room. I just let her sit there? I let him be a target? You do not do nothing, Clara, Arthur said, his voice sharp, cutting through her panic. You are a hearthbinder. You are not a skylord.
You do not strike.
You connect. You must perform the most delicate work of your life. More delicate than any wire. More precise than any gemstone setting. What? She pleaded. You cannot move your body. You cannot use your phone. But you, he said, you can touch the thread. You have been shading the thread. Now, you must pluck it. Clara recoiled. Pluck it? You mean use magic? On him. He is being watched, Clara. You must act, Arthur said, his voice low and urgent. You cannot give him a vision. You cannot send him a message. But you can give him a feeling. You must go back to your forge. Find his golden thread. And you must nudge him. Gently. Give him a sudden unease. A feeling that it's cold outside. A sudden desire to stay in, to lock his door, to drink tea and study. A mundane, plausible feeling of his own making. It was a terrifying, invasive, and brilliant solution. He will think it's his own idea, Arthur finished. Clara stared at him. This was a new kind of magic. Intimate, manipulative, and utterly necessary. She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked back to her shop, the geode shell clinging to her. She sat at her workbench. She looked at the laptop, at the name Watcher 7. Then she closed her eyes.
She found the web.
She found the brilliant, beautiful, shaded golden thread that was her brother. Her hands were shaking. She reached out with her will. Not to shield, not to see. She reached out to touch. Clara sat in the absolute stillness of her warded shop, surrounded by the invisible shell of her geode. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. In her Seidr sight, the universe of threads shimmered. And there it was, the golden, shaded cord. Her anchor, her brother. Her hand, in the real world, was clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palm. Her every instinct screamed.
Protect. Attack. Retrieve.
But she was a warrior in a battle where movement meant death. She had to do this. She focused on the thread. She could feel him so clearly at the other end. He was in his dorm room, at his desk. He was not studying. He was sketching in a notebook, his headphones on, a small window cracked open to let in the cool, damp night air. He was safe. He was content. He was oblivious. And she was about to invade that. This was not the Brinja, the battle skin. This was not Seidr, the forge. This was something new. Something invasive. A violation, born of love. Gently, she thought, her will a whisper.
A nudge.
She couldn't send him her fear. Her fear was a tidal wave of terror and rage. It would shatter his mind. It would be a flare so bright the falconer would see it from his tower. She had to translate it. She took her own icy panic and distilled it. She broke it down, like reducing a sauce, until all that was left was a single, simple, mundane concept. A draft. She focused on that single, simple feeling. A chill, a sudden, unexplained shiver on the back of the neck. The animal instinct that says, something is not right. She reached out with her will, her touch as delicate as a jeweler setting a diamond. And she plucked the golden thread. Not a pull, not a yank, just a tiny, vibrating nudge. The thread thrummed, and she felt the feedback instantly. At the other end of the line, in the dorm room, Ben froze. Clara saw it through the connection. He put his pencil down. He rubbed the back of his neck. He shivered, a small, visible tremor. He looked over his shoulder at his empty room. He frowned, pulling one headphone off. He heard nothing but the low hum of his computer. But the feeling lingered. The small, synthetic unease she had sent him. He stood up. He walked to the window, the source of the draft. He looked out into the dark, empty quad for a second. Then he shut the window firmly and latched it. He stood for a moment. Then, he crossed the room and pulled the blinds down, the plastic slats clattering shut. He went to his dorm room door. He checked the deadbolt. It was already locked, but he twisted the knob just to be sure. He yawned, rubbed his arms as if still cold, and then he went back to his desk.
He put his headphones on.
The moment was over. He hadn't been afraid. He hadn't panicked. He had just felt a chill. And he had, of his own perceived free will, closed and locked his window, pulled his blinds, and secured his door. He had made himself a harder target. And in the dark sedan outside, Watcher 7 saw nothing. Clara, her Seidr sight still open, quickly shifted her focus. She found the dull, iron thread of the Watcher. She pulled. The vision was clear. The woman in the car. She was sipping from a thermos. She saw Ben's blinds close. She picked up a small notepad, wrote a time and a note. Subject: closed blinds. No further activity. It was a non-event. A piece of boring, mundane data. The tripwire had not been sprung. The trap had been avoided. Clara opened her eyes. She was in her dark shop. The Seidr sight faded, leaving her in the mundane world, but she was trembling violently. She had done it. She had won. And she had never felt so disgusting in her entire life. She was no longer just a warrior or an artist. She was an infiltrator. She had, for the first of what she was sure would be many times, compromised a part of her soul to protect her anger. She looked at her laptop, at the list of 7 names. This was just the beginning. The war wasn't about metal. It was about minds. The geode shell dissolved, and the pre-dawn quiet of the shop was absolute. Clara sat in the darkness, the echo of her brother's manufactured chill still vibrating in her mind. She had won. The tripwire was untouched. Ben was safe, his blinds drawn, his door locked, all by his own hand. And she was, for the first time, truly and completely terrified. Not of the Falconer. She was terrified of herself. The power she had used was clean, precise, and utterly violating. She had reached into her brother's mind, into the one person she loved most in the world, and planted a feeling that was not his. She had treated her anchor as a puppet for his own protection. The bronze bracers felt cold on her skin, her bringes suddenly feeling less like armor and more like a cage for a monster. The line between love and control, she realized, was a thread she had just gleefully and necessarily cut. The sun was a faint, gray promise on the horizon when she went to Arthur's. She didn't need to be obscure. The Watchers were changing shifts, their patterns now predictable, thanks to her map. She found Arthur in his office, a fresh pot of tea steaming on his desk. He looked at her, his face somber, and simply asked, "Is he safe?" "He's safe," Clara said, her voice hollow. She sank into the chair opposite him. He just thought he felt a draft. He locked his window and pulled his blinds. The Watcher noted it as no activity. A small, pained sound escaped Arthur. It was not relief, but a deep, profound empathy. "You did it," he said softly. "The finest and most terrible work of the Seidr. You did not shape metal. You shaped motivation." "It felt," Clara whispered, looking at her own hands, "disgusting." "It is," Arthur agreed, without hesitation. "And it was perfect. You did not give him fear. You did not send him panic. You gave him prudence. You gave him a mundane, plausible reason to be safe. You used your magic to reinforce the mundane, not to shatter it. This is how we survive, Clara. This is how the Hearthbinder endures." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The Falconer commands with iron threads of obligation and money. He buys his network. You have just proven you can command with the golden thread of love. You can protect. You can nudge. You can guide. He has an army of employees. You, my dear, have the potential to build a web of allies, of secrets, of threads he can never, ever see." His words settled in her, not as comfort, but as a new, cold reality. A new direction. She had been building armor, a defensive, physical response. But the true war wasn't one of Brinja against Talons. It was a war of webs. She left Arthur's as the city woke up. She went to her shop. She unlocked the door, flipped the open sign, and began her day. The geode shell was in place. The jeweler was at her bench. Around 10, Michael, the Watcher, walked by, heading for the diner. He looked bored. He looked normal. He did not glance at her shop. Clara watched him, her eyes on the silver ring she was polishing. He was no longer a terrifying, faceless Watcher. He was Michael. She knew his thread. She knew his employer. He was no longer a shadow. He was a name. He was a link in a chain. And Clara, a woman who wove chains, knew exactly what to do with them. The war was not over. The Falconer was still in his tower. The Watchers were still on her street. Ben was still a target, but she was no longer the quarry. She was no longer just the armor. She was the spider. She was a hearthbinder, and she had a web to weave, a web of iron and gold, of knowledge and power. The geode was her fortress, and from within it, she would map her enemy, she would guard her anchor, and she would, piece by piece, thread by thread, prepare for the day the battle finally came to her door.